Okay, thank you. So we'll move on with proceedings, and hopefully Mel will join us in due course. Welcome to today's Policy and Resources Committee. I didn't imagine I'd be saying that again quite so soon, actually, I must confess, but there we are. This is a public meeting, and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording, and providing commentary on the proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Okay. Item 1, appointment of substitutes. Julian?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've got one substitute. That's Jill Sarah. She's here for Adrian Gregson.
Thank you. And obviously, I'd like to pass on the apologies of Councillor Stephen Hodgson, who is still poorly. Right, thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Anyone? Jabba.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've taken advice from the Legal and Monitoring Officer. It's nothing pecuniary, but I'm part of the Community Festivals programme.
Anyone else? Robin? Anybody else want to? No? Good. Oh, sorry, Jill.
So I'm the council assignee to Worcester Municipal Charities, which I think is involved with the Tudor House.
Okay. All on record. Thank you. Item 3, public representation. Julian?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have got a member of the public to speak to you tonight. That's Francis Lancaster. Francis is just at the back of the room, if he'd like to come and step forward and sit at the public speaker seat.
Join us, Francis. Make yourself at home. You've heard all the routine preamble before. You'll have 5 minutes, as you know, and we'll give you a little indication as we approach that point. Okay.
Because it puts pressure on this committee to rubber stamp rather than to scrutinise, and that is not the best way of doing things. Everybody understands that. I understand it's been to group leaders, but it's a pity that it doesn't go beyond that, but I understand why that is the case. Of course, as a former teacher and a continuing historian and archaeologist, I very much welcome many of the items on this list, particularly the Museum Learning Centre and the Tudor House Museum money. What concerns me is that although I know that these projects are not invented overnight, they must have been in somebody's filing cabinet, these are bids for a crock of gold of capital money. And I don't see, I trust that it is somewhere, sustainable revenue budgets attached. Because for new items, given the pressure that there is on always pressure on council budgets, but particularly now, it would be unwelcome to have to mothball parts of projects which are new in the future. So I'm looking really to see that there has been prepared really rigorous and sustainable revenue budgets. Incidentally, I read over the weekend that the Worcestershire Soldier was asking for donations. I was obviously under the mistaken impression that that was fully funded. And of course, the council wants to free up space in the art gallery. So I trust that that is going to be delivered on time. Regarding these projects, the Scala Mezzanine, for example, obviously an attempt to generate more revenue, which is very welcome. I regret that both the committee and members of the public do not have the business plan already. Seems to me a bit odd that it comes at the end rather than the beginning. And I think that has caused some doubts among members of the public that have been evident on public forums on social media. I hope that can be resolved. Given that the new Scala project is very different from the previous one because it keeps the Swan open, I also trust that there is an overall strategic arts plan, given that concentrating all the arts offer on one side, but now having it divided between two rather equally sized theatre seat sizes is very different, and no doubt will demand different management and different funding. I don't see anything for the Swan, which obviously in the future is going to need financial support for repairs and refurbishment. Incidentally, about resources, if they're short, walking past and through the London Road entrance to Fort Royal Park, over a month ago, I reported the ever-growing graffiti there. That park is award-winning. The council, local councillors, the Friends of Fort Royal put a lot of effort into improving and maintaining that park. If it's a question of resources, I don't know, maybe something else. Surely that should be one of the first places that is cleared. And I hope that it will be, because it is now beyond the month for any graffiti, no matter that this is, I would have thought, a council priority. I also very much, of course, welcome the sculpture. Unless the council has a fixed price, these things are very, very pricey, even with a Battle of Worcester Society donation on top. I think you might need to watch that budget, unless you've got a good deal. I don't think it's enough, and you know that I don't think it's enough for this city, which is so much involved with the Battle of Worcester. And I think that if there was a Battle of Worcester Trail like Newark has the National Civil War Centre. It also has a complete star fort, the Queen's Sconce, but it's in the middle of nowhere. I was at a conference there, actually in the museum, and apart from the museum attendees, virtually nobody was there. Even in the castle grounds, where there was a live firing cannon and musketry display, as there is in Worcester, the attendees at the conference were the audience. And it seems to me disappointing that we can't start at the ground up. If there aren't large capital monies available for a complete trail, let's start at the bottom. And many years ago, there was an idea for a diorama. And I contributed several hundred 25mm figures to it. The diorama never appeared, and my figures disappeared. The fugitive army marched off somewhere. But I still have a couple of hundred mainly painted figures. I'm sure that if an appeal went out, other enthusiasts would be prepared to donate. And if we were to create in the country not only the memorial and statue sculpture, but also the largest diorama, in order to enhance what in the commandery regarding the Civil War and Commonwealth I think is adequate, but ought to be developed, then that would be a tourist draw. And then the council could work from there. I think it's a pity that there isn't already a trail, because more attention might have been paid to Poet Bridge and its condition, for example. That's a key part of the Battle of Worcester. The site in King Street is the last phase of the battle that was fought all over our city, and there were, of course, 2 sieges. I don't know how many people in Tamar Close off Newtown Road know that in the first siege, there was a parliamentary gun battery there. That's what the ditch and the bank are. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank very much for another opportunity to speak to this committee. I hope that these revenue budgets are in preparation, because I know from experience it's frustrating when you have to cut back on something that you're really enthusiastic about, and these are great projects. So once again, I thank you and your committee for your attention.
You're always very welcome, Francis, and you're obviously equally welcome to stay for the remainder of the conversation. So with that, we will move to the substantial part of the evening. Item 4, Levelling Up Fund, £5 million for cultural investment. David.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just start by a sort of preamble, really. So you have seen the main report, and the Appendix 1, which includes the outcomes as defined by the department, I think it's just important reminding everybody that we are pretty tied by the government rules and regulations around this. It is the money is set aside for cultural activities, and the outcomes shown in Appendix 1 are those that we must use in terms of measuring the impact that we will be making with these investments. Appendix 2 has just been republished to include the Swan Theatre as a new project. So hopefully you will have seen Appendix 2. Appendix 3 is an exempt appendix, and including the RAG rating of the projects around deliverability, value for money, and partner engagement. And I'm happy to discuss that appendix if and when members wish to go into a closed session. There is, I'll do this at the beginning before I go any further. So there is an update to the report. We have been informed that the deadline for submission, very helpfully, has moved from the 10th of May to the 3rd of June. So that gives us an extra 3 weeks of preparation. The department has also said that it wants to work with us during that period to finalise the bids. So we will be engaging the department in the work and probably in the stakeholder engagement, so that by the time we get to the 3rd of June, there won't be any surprises in terms of what we're submitting, certainly from the department. Now that means that the P&R committee, and he flicks back through his notes, of the 21st of May is now within scope of the development period. Originally that would have been after the date of submission, but that's now within the development period. So what I'm proposing is an amendment to recommendation 1.3, and hopefully you've got that in front of you. So I'll just read out what the proposed amendment is, and that is: delegates responsibility to the Managing Director in consultation with group leaders to prepare and submit a formal bid to government by the 3rd of June, that's the change, subject to any material changes being referred to the May meeting of the committee prior to bid submission. So that leaves the opportunity open for members to use that committee meeting at the end of May as another opportunity. If members feel that there is a material matter that's arisen that they wish to discuss in public, we have that extra opportunity before submission of the final report or submission of the business case to the department. So that with that amendment in as a recommendation, I'll now just move to the report itself. And we've spent an awful lot of time speaking about this at member reference group, and we had an all-member briefing yesterday evening. So you'll be absolutely delighted to know that I'm not going to go through all of the projects. I'm getting smiles around the table, which is a first. So I'll just, by way of introduction, refer you to the recommendations, refer you to the background. It has been, as has already been mentioned, a very, very tight process. It was on the 6th of March that we got initial notification, my birthday. It wasn't until the 25th of March that we actually got the submission template details. And then it was very soon, in early April, that we began dialogue with members. And we now find ourselves on the 23rd of April with a list of projects totaling £5 million. So if I move on, you'll see in terms of section 4, we make reference to the cultural context. One of the three elements that I mentioned a moment ago is around stakeholder engagement. It would have been practically impossible to have undertaken any meaningful stakeholder engagement in the last week or two before this report needed to be published. So we are relying to a certain extent on previous engagement activities and previous plans, and there is reference to those in section 4. In terms of the projects themselves, I'm not going to go into those in any detail, other than to say, and this is reference to the exempt appendix. Officers have done a significant amount of work in terms of due diligence, looking at the value for money, which includes the costs, the outputs, possible outputs that we're going to be delivering, the stakeholder engagement, which is significant in terms of some of the projects that we are proposing, and is lacking in others, and in deliverability. So we've tried to aim for projects that have already been in gestation for some period of time. These are not projects that, in most cases, but not all, are new projects. And you'll see from some of the work that's already been done that work was already in train before we arrived at this list. I think that's all I want to say at the moment. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I said the Swan's been added to the list, yeah, to Appendix 2. Yeah, so you'll know that Appendix 2 does include the Swan Theatre, and that has now been published. So I don't wish to say any more really at this stage, and happy to take questions, and Sian and Shane have both been involved in the project, so I'm sure between all three of us we can pick up any questions that members wish to ask. Thank you, Chair.
David, thank you. Obviously, we're here for a discussion, but we will be mindful of what I think we all share is we had a long conversation yesterday evening. There have been other conversations prior to that. So obviously, clearly, if members want to raise issues tonight, then please do so. But let's try to keep it within that overall context. Okay. So questions or comment, please, Pat.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. The most important one first, I think. I pay tribute to the amount of energy that's gone into producing the play strategy. But as I've said, I'm saying this again because it's a public meeting, that we have not done enough for young people in this city. I get no sense of this city having a vibrant youth culture. And I will come back to haunt you, David, whether I win my seat or not on the 2nd of May, and I'm letting members know as well, I'll be back, because this is a really important point, that we haven't been able to do enough for young people, particularly older teenagers. That's my most important point. The second point is, for point of information, I note that former councillor Francis Lancaster was mentioning the Worcestershire Soldier, and as the Armed Forces champion, I'm quite privy to information about this, as some of you will be. And I do know that the Worcestershire Soldier bid requires matched funding, and it cannot be provided by another government source. So whatever funding is used to match the current grant, which is more than generous, certainly, it cannot be another government source. So any other sources will work. So I hope that, yeah, thank you. But the youth thing, I think, is absolutely crucial.
Pat, thank you. David.
Thank you. I hope you don't have to come back to haunt me on this one. I absolutely, you know I agree with you in terms of the provision in the city. I'm always conscious that we probably don't do enough for those communities furthest away from the city centre. So with that proviso and that acknowledgement, I think I think where we've, and I know some people, you know, may disagree, but I think where we've got to now with the Scala project in terms of the Arts Centre, I would hope very much that as we start to develop the business plan further and as we start to look at programming for that building with organisations like Dance Fest, for example, involved, I hope very much that some of the activity, I'm not suggesting all of it, but some of that activity will suit a younger audience, not just in terms of watching performances, but also equally importantly, engaging young people in the arts in terms of performing themselves and being engaged. So I hope very, very much that the new Arts Centre development goes some way to addressing those concerns. But as I've said before when we've spoken about this, I know it will never be enough. I know we can always do more, but I think it's a step in the right direction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I'd like to echo Pat's comments on the energy and the time that officers have spent in preparing this report and, in fact, the application. I wonder now that as the dates have moved, whether or not it would be wiser to resubmit the reports to P&R on the 21st with a bit more detail behind the costs. One of the things that particularly concerns me is the Swan Theatres project. The Changing Places toilet in Cornmarket cost us 85 grand. As I understand, there's also a lift required. So I'm just wondering where all of this money is, and that lift is not going to be cheap. So I'm just wondering where all the funding is going to come from. And again, I just don't want to see something that we end up having to change time and time again throughout the process. So I am wondering whether I can amend your amendment, David, to suggest that this report does come back to P&R. This, you know, I think, I'm not going to speak for everybody. I'm happy for these projects to be progressed further. But I think we need to make the final decisions about what projects we put into the fund or put into the funding application in this committee at the first opportunity in the new civic year. Sorry.
Thank you. David.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start by pointing out the disadvantage of your suggestion and then agreeing with you somewhat, if I may. The difficulty is that the deadline was originally the 10th of May. It's now the 3rd of June. Publication date, says he, referring back to his notes, publication date for that committee report would be the 13th of May, which means we would have to finalise the projects by the 10th of May. So, somewhat ironically, to produce a report for that committee means we would lose the 3 extra weeks that we've just been given. So it would need a change to the recommendations before you in this report to do so. But if that's what members want to do, that's not a problem. But what I would say is that we need to work in such a way that if we bring a report back to the committee on the 21st of May, we still allow ourselves some time after that date, up until the 3rd of June, to make any further last minute amendments. In other words, maintain the delegation to me in consultation with group leaders so that we maximise the amount of time we've got. It is, even the 3rd of June, whilst it gives us an extra 3 weeks, is still incredibly tight to do all of the things that members are quite rightly raising in terms of due diligence. We can't afford to not use those 3 weeks. I think the other important thing is that the department has said it is willing to work with us, and that includes during that period. So we will need to maximise that period in order to share what we're doing with the department. They have said that they will provide resources to help us finalise our submission, what they mean, what they've said is they can't obviously help us write the bid, but they will act as, for want of a better word, critical friends during that period to help us get the bid into the best shape it can be before it's submitted on the 3rd of June. So I absolutely agree with you. It would certainly be helpful from the members' perspective to see another iteration and update on the 21st of May. But I think we just need to tread carefully so that we are then given that additional time post that date to continue to work until right up to the 3rd of June. That would be my suggestion, and we will probably need to think about, and I'll pass this particular point on to Sian, because she's better at amending recommendations than I am. So we will probably need to think about what the recommendations might need to be tonight if members wish to receive a report on the 21st and give us the opportunity to continue to work right up until the deadline. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Is there anything you want to pick up on that, Sian, for the moment? Or?
I think once we've had a discussion, we can round up on what the correct form of words are. That was a proposal, which obviously would need a seconder to proceed to the vote anyway.
Sure. Okay, well, I've got Eleanor, Jill, then Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Really appreciate the work that's gone into this in the ridiculous timescales that are imposed upon officers to come up with cases for and costings. I think, as I said last night, I'm really concerned about the budget allocation for the Swan Theatre. You know, a lift to accommodate the motorised disability scooters. That budget is nowhere near adequate. And I really would like to see, perhaps we need to revisit the Swan project, because I think more funding will need to be transferred from other budgets. So I think we need to be minded of that. And then on that basis, I agree what Councillor Norfolk has suggested. I think we do need to have something come back to committee again, because there are other bids here that are very loose in terms of the costings, particularly with the stage. That's a fantastic idea, but whether that can come off or not, I really don't know, because there are so many unknowns. So I think it's great that we can have greater scrutiny as councillors going forward, and that's why I would, you know, agree with yourself, Robin, that we need to have this come back. I know it's hard, but I think we do need to. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering whether any thought had been given to how so many projects are going to be sustained at once, considering that there's a deadline of 26 to get them all done. Is that right? Has that been at all part of what you've done so far?
David.
Yes, you would imagine we have had a discussion about how we are going to take on. I think I haven't done the metrics, so I couldn't give you a breakdown specifically, but there will be some projects where we will hand over project delivery and management to the organisations that are the grant recipients. So, for example, Tudor House, which is probably the one that I'm closest to, they've already done some work around QS in their costs, and they've set aside costs within the budget for project management. So there are projects there where, whilst we would remain the accountable body and we would need to provide an oversight to the project management will take place within the recipient organisation. There are other projects that will sit within our own staff resources, and whilst we have 5 million to spend, we will be taking an admin figure for the projects to cover our own internal project management costs. So we will need additional resources, and we will build that into the budgets. So not the whole 5 million will effectively be deployed on the projects. There will be some money that will go towards the resources needed to manage them.
So does that just mean that you know approximately which ones are going to need a bit of an uplift and which will be by themselves, you know, self-running?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Lynn.
Yes, and to specifically follow up on Robin's point and the suggestion about coming back to a May P&R. I think, you know, we have a list of projects which currently total up to 5 million. There, we haven't prioritised within that list, and some of the costs are more robust than others. And I actually, you know, don't particularly want to focus on the Swan Theatre being the least robust, so to speak. I think there are others in that list that are pretty well finger in the air. So the reason I think that we might need, that we should have the opportunity to revisit it, I think by the 21st of May, we may well have a list that now adds up to 6 million or 5.5 million, and how our members, where is the decision to be made as to who falls off the end or which project gets squeezed. I think that's the concern, and now we've got that bit extra time. So I don't know whether kind of colleagues agree, whether we can kind of agree that as an amendment. I've got a separate comment I'd like to make, but.
No, I mean, I think we can all acknowledge the fact that this would be a challenge, simply rolling from 1 week to the next, you know, a month from now, 5, 6 weeks, given the fact that the council will change inevitably, you know, many new people perhaps taking their places around various committees, and indeed perhaps this committee, who will have and the view of P&R, the view of the council generally, will evolve on that basis. And I think it would be, whilst it's imperative that we, as the current members of this committee, make sure that everything is facing in the same direction, I think it might be just a little bit sort of premature of us to assume that, you know, our views of how the thing actually moves from here to early June might need revisiting. So I'm happy to. Sorry, Dan? Sean.
Just to add to that in terms of the process. So one of the key features of the submission is that they are signed off by Section 151 officer as value for money. So, and it's not simply a case of putting my signature on it. They have to give a justification as to why I think that. And there will be two components to that, essentially. One is that the estimates which have been developed are sound, robust. So if we go through this process over the next couple of weeks, we'll test that and try to come to a conclusion where we're happy that that is the case. But the second part to that is the benefit cost ratio. So we've got to ask for external experts to carry out that work for us. And of course, they will take the inputs, the costs which we give them, and the outputs and outcomes. And the problem is, the longer we delay in terms of giving them that robust information, the harder that becomes for them to complete that piece of work before the deadline. So it's finding a balance between those two things. All I'm trying to do is give assurance that we won't be submitting something unless we are collectively happy that that's a sufficiently robust cost, which we can justify and make a statement that we're happy with. Okay.
Any, Mel?
Chair, thank you. Yeah, I think just to touch upon timings as well, isn't it? There's a fine balance. We don't have much time, but the last thing we want is for last minute ideas coming through which we can't properly cost or do anything with. We need to be very mindful of that. And I'm conscious there will be new council and new councillors and people will have all these ideas, but we are very limited with time, and I just think people need to be realistic with time frames. That's all. Thanks.
I think we're fast approaching the point where we can't really consider any new projects unless there is something that is brought to any of your attention or our attention that has had a significant amount of due diligence work already done with it. So if there is something that comes out of the ether that is pretty well worked up and meets the outcome and output requirements and the eligibility requirements of the programme, then it could be considered, but only if it's very well thought through already. But even then, it's going to be very difficult because we are in the process now of appointing our consultants to do the cost-benefit analysis. And over the next few days, following last night's meeting, we had a meeting with the majority of the project officers that are working on the projects today, and the challenge we talked about is next week. I don't need to tell you, do I? You know, it's election week, so the back end of the week is pretty much written off for a lot of people. We have a returning officer that's got to sign this off as well. We've got a large number of staff volunteering across the polling stations. So half of next week is effectively written off. The following week it's Bank Holiday Monday. And then that Friday is the deadline of the 10th of May. So we've got, I'm not trying, I know I'm not trying to be defensive on this, but I'm just being realistic in terms of we've got part of this week, part of next week, and then the following week is a Bank Holiday Monday. And then we're into publication date for the next meeting of the P&R committee. So we will have to tread carefully, and therefore the ability, I know you want to come in, Sean, the ability to have any new things is going to be really, really challenging. So if people come up to you with bright ideas, by all means consider them, but just be careful about saying, yes, we can do that, we can add that to the list. I think the next sort of 10 days is, the next 10 working days taking out bank holiday and time for the election is going to be really, really critical for us to get things sorted out and to bring you something at the next committee where we've been able to answer the majority of the questions around the due diligence, which is really where we want to get to. Thank you.
Sean.
On this procedural point, is it okay if I come in? I know there's other questions. Yeah. Yeah. So I think just hearing the debate and understanding as we do that that clarity and a public message is needed both for stakeholders and the department. I think the important thing that we obtain from tonight is the committee's mandate to the proposed list of projects, because then something else can come back in May subject to that final due diligence. So my proposed wording, this is obviously first cut. So 1.1 stands as is. And then 1.2, for example, could be reviews the list of proposed projects and officer recommendations in the appendices and determines those projects which should be developed for the council submission through due diligence and consultation with stakeholders. And what stakeholders therefore includes group leaders, arts council, cultural stakeholders and the department. Shall I do that again or shall I carry on? Please do if you would. So, okay, so the second one, reviews the list of proposed projects and officer recommendations in the appendices and determines which projects should be developed for the council submission through due diligence with stakeholders. And then one point...
Before you move on to the next one, determines which projects,
determines which projects from the appendix, yeah, yeah. Yeah, sorry, which projects from the appendix should be developed through due diligence with stakeholders. Then a new 1.3 to replace that, which is there, which would say, so it's that the committee receives a further report at its May meeting to scrutinise final proposals.
Those words? Yeah. Good, excellent. Please do, yeah, no, carry on.
When you say those projects, it rather sounds like we'll be saying, oh, that one's in and that one's out.
Yes.
But I thought we were all happy that with this list.
So, so sorry. So the way that the appendix is currently written, There are a list of projects which are recommended and then there's not recommended. And I think what would be very helpful in terms of the parallel work streams is that there is a clear decision tonight that the recommended list is the list that's proceeded with. And I think that's the important point to secure from tonight.
Through you, Chair, the very last recommendation, I've got a query on it, so can you read it again, please?
So my new 1.3?
Yes.
Yeah, so that would now say, because it's that the committee receives a further report at its May meeting to scrutinise final proposals.
So can I come back? I've got a problem with the word final proposals because that suggests that we won't make any subsequent changes from that committee, but that committee report will need to be published 3 weeks before the deadline. So we might want to make some changes in the following 3 weeks. So we probably need to take out the word final. I'm just trying to give us the wiggle room so that you guys and officers have the opportunity to maximise the time we've got available. And I don't think we should be saying the final proposals for that committee.
At what point do we have to seal the envelope, so to speak?
Well, we could, as per the original, and I'm not suggesting we go back to the original words, but as per the original, we could form a meeting between, I would suggest, senior officers and group leaders and seal the deal on the day before we need to submit, because that was the original recommendation that gave myself and the group leaders delegated authority to submit the final bid. So we could, under the current proposals, with just a date change, go up to that date. I'm absolutely, not suggesting we don't have a report back to the next P&R, but I think we just need to be careful about saying those will be the final proposals, because we might want to tweak them in the remaining 3 weeks of development phase that we've got available to us, either in terms of the scale of the funding split between the projects. We might decide to say to members, or members might decide that actually one project bites the dust before we get to final submission. And I think we need to keep that flexibility open during that final 3 week period, if I may. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I've got a number of people who've been waiting patiently. Marjorie first.
I wanted to say it sounds like the kind of thing I should have said 3/4 of an hour ago. So, just simply my thanks for all the hard work and thinking and creativity that's gone into bringing this list together. I think it's a good list. The item that I'm most excited by is the 1.6 million on the mezzanine, because I think that's going to make the buildings work together, and I think it's going to be so important for the success of La Scala. And there's a couple that I'm slightly concerned about, and one of them actually is the Swan Theatre, because it was all such a rush on Friday morning. You know, first thing on Friday, we realised that here's something we've overlooked, and by lunchtime, it's cut and dried. And I just wonder whether that was too much of a rush, and there might be other things that they could really, unless of course they've been storing up these things for a long time. And I'm also concerned about the stage, because none of us have any idea how large it's going to be, and what kind of skills are going to be required to move it around, and where we're going to be able to store it. And insurance is also a factor here. And then turning to this situation we find ourselves in, I think it's very difficult, but we should try to preserve. We should try to get hold of those 3 weeks and use them to the best way we can, rather than starting again with looking at projects. And one final thing, I wonder if there's any, will there be any benefit in trying to categorise them into cut and dried, we know what we're doing, this can go ahead, such as La Scala, and then other ones which are, we haven't really quite got enough information. And then that might help to use the time more efficiently. Thank you.
Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, the list, I don't think there's any projects on the list that, you know, I don't think would, that shouldn't be on there. And having said that, I think probably in my kind of view, although I'm not an expert, the community stage and the sustainable Pitchcroft seem to me the most uncertain and least developed. And whilst the community stage is relatively low cost, sustainable Pitchcroft is quite a big chunk of the 5 million. So I think it's really important that you know, officers, group leaders have the time and are empowered to, you know, move things around within this list, cut things off that just aren't going to make it. And of course, you know, if you're being supported by the department through that process, sort of, as you say, as a critical friend, then you're going to come up. It's going to come down to the department's view of these projects as to whether they're worth submitting to them or not. So I think it's really, really important that there is that flexibility to use the time to work with the department to ensure that we don't submit something that they you know, don't approve, and that we can, and that you have the ability to move things around. It would be remiss of me to not mention what I mentioned last night, which is considering the music box bus to be electric, which obviously would be a substantially bigger cost than is currently budgeted for in the proposals. And yeah, to my mind, there's likely to be wiggle room to look at those kind of options for, you know, splitting the budget differently than it currently shows. The other point about having that wiggle room is you know, as you go forward, understanding, you know, the potential kind of revenue issues and cost issues and risks as those develop. You know, some projects might actually look a lot less attractive, even though they're quite well developed. So yeah, I think clearly there's an appetite for something to come back to this committee before the final proposal, but I do think that however it's worded, it needs to delegate as much as we feel comfortable with to group leaders and officers. At the end of the day, group leaders, you know, will listen to their members and take those views to those meetings. So although it's not not under public discussion, if we've approved this list of projects this evening, I think that's adequate.
Many thanks, Jill.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say that I was the most delighted to see the Scala mezzanine disappearing or being properly renovated. When we went to our site visit, I thought it was such a shame that that carbuncle was staying. So completely brilliant. Can I just ask a practical question though? Is there actually physically enough time to improve on these costings between now and when the report has to be ready to go? Yeah, there is. So we can make some meaningful progress on that in spite of everything else that's going on.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Lynn.
Thank you very much. I think there's a whole raft of things. The list of recommended projects I am content with. It isn't a prioritised list. We do have within our confidential papers an assessment with regard to an initial assessment with regard to value for money, deliverability within the end point time, which is March 26, and the level of stakeholder engagement. So there is a RAG rating on those criteria. And in talking about the financial assessment, more detailed, more robust costings and looking at the cost-benefit ratio, effectively that might end up with a kind of a priority list, you know, the best scoring and the worst scoring, so to speak. But we absolutely are not in position to say that now. And I think that is, you know, within the list, we might have favourite things, but it feels way too early to be saying which are our favourites and which we don't mind if they fall off the bottom, so to speak. We need more information to do that. So I think that is what we'd like to see, a more robust costing that is then the beginning of the bones of a priority list that we can agree on May the 21st. I think will be really helpful. I think it is really important. I mean, I want to make the point, this is not our list in the sense, this is not our priority. You know, the government has made an announcement to this council and to Worcester's MP saying, we've got 5 million for you. And the strings attached to it are very specific. And I think it's really important that we specify that, or we say that really clearly to the public. It is capital only. It isn't revenue. There is no revenue there at all. It's capital only. It's the government's priorities, and their specification as to what is culture is very closely defined. Cultural events include those related to, I quote, film, TV, music, radio, heritage, arts, museums, and libraries. Now, I've already had people saying to me, well, I don't think you should be spending money on that. And why can't you? No, that isn't levelling up. Why can't we do so and so? That is not my priority. That wouldn't necessarily be the priority of the Labour group for levelling up in Worcester if we were given free rein as to how we could spend the money. I'm particularly disappointed that sport is excluded from it. Because we had previously submitted a bid for levelling up funding of the Nunnery Wood Sports Centre and the running track. And that would have been, you know, an investment in a different part of the city, would have been an investment in health and well-being, would have been an investment potentially, you know, for young people with, you know, with venues close to it. But this 5 million, we're not allowed to do that with it. So, you know, yes, people might have other ideas, but unless it fits with what the department has said we have to do, we can't do it. So I think, and it's really, really unfortunate, you know, that maybe it's deliberate that they choose to doing it during a local election campaign, but it does kind of ratchet up the potential for spin and misinformation. I also find it really disappointing, you know, that Whitehall doesn't understand what local elections are about and what it looks like. Because as David has said, you know, the initial letter that we got literally had no detail. It was, you've got 5 million, we'll work out. So even the detail of the strings, it was like a fortnight later, and then still dialogue as to, well, what actually does that mean? It's capital money, but they want to demonstrate that jobs are preserved or jobs are created, which is a significant challenge with the parameters of what is cultural. So I think, you know, the people of Worcester need to know that and understand that. And I was thinking, I mean, it's a bit like, isn't it, you know, and of course 5 million is welcome. These are all worthy investments within the city, and it actually kind of illustrates the scale of investment or ambition and things that it would be nice to do and that we'd like to do. But it is a bit like, you know, your favourite aunt, you know, giving you a pair of socks or a new jumper when what you actually want is, you know, so again, yeah.
Running track.
Yeah, a running track or new shoes or, you know, yeah, we are where we are.
I mean, some people are grateful for a pair of socks, but there we are. Sean.
With your forbearance committee, we could have another go at drafting by committee. I've tried to take account of the points. So 1.2 could now say, proposed projects and officer recommendations in the appendices, and agrees that the recommended projects in Appendix 2 should be developed for the council's submission through due diligence with relevant stakeholders. 1.3, all right, receives a further report at its May meeting to scrutinise the proposals before the final bid submission is produced.
Yes. So, Ellen, did you want to speak? Okay, David, yes, and then Karen.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back on a couple of the points that were made in previous remarks. So first of all, yes, I met with the Swan Theatre on Friday, but the project that they're proposing had been in gestation, incubation, whatever you want to call it, for some time. So they did have some numbers and they had thought through what they wanted to do. So whilst I agree that we need to do more work on them to make sure they're robust, particularly around the capacity of the lift. And when we met earlier today with officers, I passed on the remarks regarding lift capacity, because we are in the process of having a new lift installed in the Museum and Art Gallery that will be big enough to accommodate a mobility scooter or a motorised wheelchair. And we are in the process, as some of you know, of installing a new lift in the Swan building, in the Scala building. I'll get these right one day. In the Scala building. So I spoke to Jamie today to make sure that we didn't fall foul of that comment also, because I think in any of the buildings, whether it's the Swan, the Scala, the MAG, if we don't consider making sure that a new lift does provide genuine access to everybody, I'm not suggesting it will be achievable in every case, because I don't know the building circumstances. So with that caveat, I think we will endeavour to use best endeavours to make sure that we deliver on that. So the Swan costs had been worked up prior, although I think they need to do some more work. And then with regards to the electric bus, we spoke to Zoe today, who's leading on that particular one, and we've asked her to go back to Seven Arts to find out what an electric bus would cost, because that will then be a choice for members, probably when we get to the next meeting, as to whether members choose to make the investment. And it might be that officers might have to recommend that costs are taken out of another project to do that particular thing, but that might be something that members choose to invest in as an alternative. So we've picked up on that one as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got Karen, Mel, and then Eleanor. So Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I won't repeat what other members have said already, but I agree with so much of what everyone has said to do with the principle of this. But also recognising the time that officers are spending on this means that you're not spending time even now on things that you were planning to spend time on, which of course has a knock-on effect for other things that you were planning on doing. I'm very aware that your property team is very small, and we have been waiting for work on Gallivant Park for a long time. and obviously in other parts of the city you have. So I'm pleased to hear that you're allowing an increase in the team, perhaps, if we are going to keep some of these projects going. That's my query, because I can't see how the team at the moment, the size it is, can actually deliver as many of these projects that are here within the time scale that we've got. I think that the Levelling Up Fund is about inclusion. It's about serving, you know, the poorest in society, helping people access things. The community aspects of many of these projects, I think, are really important, and particularly access to music, to dance, to things that bring joy to people's lives when other aspects of their lives aren't going right. I think we saw in lockdown how important parks were for people. But also the changing places toilets. You know, when people can't leave their homes because they haven't got access to a toilet. In Gallivant Park, I think because of the regiment, because of the importance, the historic importance of the park, that is something that is going to bring equality for the usage of that park, which I really, really welcome. I too have concerns about some of the costs. I know how hard it is to get fixed costs for projects. I do still think that they have lengthened the time for us to do this project, but actually we could do it another 6 months, to be fair. And actually then we'd have the confidence in it. So having this flexibility between projects, I think, is absolutely crucial. I think it's very unfair what they've done, putting it through the local election, the pressure on everybody, including us as members, and particularly with public scrutiny, which is all really important to have so that everyone thinks that what we're doing is the right thing. £5 million is a lot of money. It could make a lot of difference to lots of people's lives. I hope that the projects do. But again, I will speak on behalf of the Greens. We wouldn't have chosen it to be such a narrow field. I particularly support the running track, the fact that you can't have home meets. You know, it's a sport, it's a very cheap sport. You just need a pair of trainers. It's one of the cheapest sports that you can do. And actually, I went to see Robin Walker on Friday just to say, please shout for Worcester to have some funding for the running track. Because when we see what's happening potentially to the cricket ground, we've had the rugby, it's just, you know, it's one sorry state. And actually, we need to be a first-class sporting city. Thank you.
Just to reiterate really what Lynn said, I did take the running track proposal specifically to the department for a specific view, and it was clear from their reply that it didn't meet the criteria in terms of culture. Sport is not included. The only thing I was thrown, the only bone I was thrown, if that's the right phrase, was is the running track a heritage or, you know, building that would therefore fit within that category. Unfortunately, even I'm not going to push it that far. So you're right to raise it, Karen. You're right to raise it with Robin, and hopefully there will be new opportunities in the future that will allow us to meet some of our other needs, or even better, without being any not being party political, or even better in the future, we get an allocation and it's left to local members to decide how best to invest it. But you know, we'll wait for that day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Mel.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just think, who knows, you know, maybe later, won't be too political, a change of government, there will be a different, because I think people hear Levelling Up and they think, yeah, it's going to help people in need, and it's a bit, well, a lot more nuanced than that. But I think just going back to, and I think what Pat said at the very beginning, I do feel youth are very much forgotten in Worcester, and that is a high priority for myself, and I'm really pleased that I saw the council move forward with the pump track at PED, and also looking at Music Box. You know, I think this is really important. I'd really like to see this up and coming. But on the theme of this, I think we need to remember it is business and culture, and it would be nice if we could have a green vehicle, but I don't want us to end up with no vehicle because we're trying to meet some sort of environmental criteria which this doesn't cover. Yeah, so I just want to make sure that the youth don't use that, you know, lose out. I would much rather us just have one less clean vehicle and a lot of young people catered for than not. Thanks.
Green. Eleanor.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to just to reinforce what the Managing Director said about the lift status, you know, and the fact that I'm really grateful that you took that point to the Swan Theatre. I think people very often forget, through innocence in designing buildings, they just think, oh, we'll just put a lift in and that will do, it meets the criteria for disability access. It doesn't. And there are so many people in Worcester of the community who are disabled, who are so isolated because they cannot access many public buildings and private buildings as well, because the lifts just cannot cope with the weight of their scooters. And I think, you know, and I'm sure Robin will agree, we want to make Worcester a very inclusive and accessible city. And, you know, more changing place toilets, yes, bring them on, please. So many people cannot access day-to-day, you know, things that we take for granted because they cannot use the basic needs of life, really. But I'm glad that it's on the agenda now about the lifts, that, you know, they need to be weight-bearing. And it was a point that was addressed at planning when we came to the Scala Theatre, because it was a question I specifically asked to make sure that those lifts could bear the weight of motorised scooters. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Eleanor, thank you. My list is I'm at the end of that list now. Would anyone like to add any further comment or question? Robin.
Thank you, Chair. And just to reiterate the point about youth, and I was heartened to hear yesterday evening that we are talking about co-designing some of the new play spaces with young people in mind. So I think, you know, that goes a long way to equalising that balance, really. Thank you, anyway. I'll shut up.
Fine. Lynn.
Just one small comment to make tonight in case I forget in the future. It's with regard to the proposed Battle of Worcester sculpture, because it's a concept that has been around in different locations over a period of time, and the project that we have before us now on the list tonight is a sculpture on the King Street car park railings. It is of Sidbury Gate in Sidbury, which is the ideal location. And I say, no, it's an idea that of different permutations. You know, the Battle of Worcester Society were looking at putting something in Fort Royal Park, which didn't necessarily quite work. The American presidents didn't quite work, and Sidbury Gate shutting out the view from the top of Fort Royal Park potentially didn't quite work. I think the idea now absolutely is workable, is in the right location, and I think it would be actually a really lovely legacy for Richard Shaw, who was chair of the Battle of Worcester Society for many years and was so passionate about the concept, and it's a pity he won't be with us to see it realised.
If I may, just to reply to that through you, Chair. You'll know, Lynn, that I spoke to Adrian a number of times about where best for any statue or monument to go, and I think where we've ended up is a great place because of the footfall going past the statue, if that's or sculpture, whatever the right phrase is. Originally there were suggestions that were somewhat, you know, off the beaten track, and it's nice to have it in that location, and it's even nicer to note that when we were talking today with officers around how we demonstrate a cost-benefit ratio for a sculptor, which I don't know how to do that myself. Our consultants said they're already working on 4 others across the country to put the BCR together for this sort of thing. And one of the most important elements in adding a value to a sculpture like this is footfall. So having it in a location where we are maximising the footfall actually will help us to enhance our cost-benefit ratio when we submit our proposal to government. So it seems to be in the right place for a number of reasons. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Any further questions or comment? Pat, did you want to?
Very briefly, the planning committee decided when we were looking at Benedicto's application for an extension that the 106 money would be well spent on replacing the ethos of the Civil War, because they're removing a section of railings, which actually are rather beautifully constructed, and they do have a reference to the Civil War. So there may even be a little 106 money to add to it.
Okay. Anyone else? No. Right.
Can do, Chair. I mean, if you want, I'm happy to read them out once more for...
I will be entirely...
Once more for the road.
I will leave the
So there's 4 recommendations. The first is, so recommendations that the committee, number 1, notes the proposed grant determination to Worcester City Council for 5 million capital funding from the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities for cultural projects subject to the government's grant criteria and conditions. Number 2, bear with me.
Julian can probably read it.
Reviews the list of proposed projects and officer recommendations in the appendices and agrees that the recommended projects in Appendix 2 should be developed for the Council's bid submission through due diligence with relevant stakeholders. Number 3, receives a further report at its May meeting to scrutinise the proposals before the final bid submission is produced. And number 4, notes that further reports will be brought to committee as the bid is assessed by government.
Sorry. I am. You know what I'm like. You've worked with me long enough. On the 1.3, absolutely agree with what we're saying, what we're suggesting about the committee, the next committee reviews before final submission. Does it need to go further in terms of delegating authority for that final submission? Or are you happy with it as it stands?
Chair, can I deploy my famous phrase? That's necessarily implied, because in our committee system, when we're back here on the 21st of May, there will be a recommendation for an officer delegation at that point to submit the final bid in consultation with group leaders.
I defer to my colleague.
I'm just... AOB. I'm happy to go into private session if there's anybody who wants to discuss anything that we weren't able to, but I suspect we've basically concluded our business. So on that note, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. This is